Setting the Stage, Episode 10, Bob and the World Below Azbym.
So today I'm interviewing Bob about his campaign setting. So let's get into it. First, you want to tell us a bit about who you are outside of D&D, and where you live, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I'm a 30-year-old guy out in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're technically Durham, right next door. We
Mhm.
moved out here. My wife and I are both from middle of Wisconsin. We lived in Wisconsin for 25 years, our whole lives, and after getting married, moved out here. Of course, that's when COVID hit, and found ourselves clammed up inside. Recently, have moved over to Durham to buy a house. We had a kid a couple months ago, and yeah, just having a good time.
Okay, great. I went to college in Beloit, which is barely Wisconsin,
Sure.
but
Yeah,
still.
yeah. I went to college in Kenosha area, which has been in the news more recently, but just a little bit
Yeah.
farther north of Chicago.
Okay, cool. How old is your baby?
2 months, 9 weeks today.
All right, nice. My son just turned 2, so
You forget probably
yeah, yeah.
this age. I mean, like that's what everybody kind of says is that you kind of forget what exactly it's like. I mean, you remember somewhat, but like just we're up every couple of hours, and
You're so sleep deprived. Like, how could you remember it?
I'll tell you what. I was telling one of our therapists the other day that. My doctor recommended we get 5 hours of consecutive sleep as, like, the magic number, and she goes, "What about, like, 8 hours?" I'm like, "Dude, that is not reasonable at all." Like, she doesn't have
Mhm.
kids. She doesn't know. 8 is
Yeah,
one of those things that just is not happening, so, like, 5 is the gold standard is, like, a good way to go.
yeah. What me and my wife did, when he was still doing night feeding, was we split it up. So like, I got the first half of the night, and she got the second half of the night.
That's what we're doing, yeah, so, like, I
Yeah.
kinda take over when I get done with work at about 5 o'clock, and I kinda go all the way to about 1 a.m. She
Hmm.
goes to bed at, like, 8 or whatever, and then she's up at midnight, he's up at midnight. We kinda do like a night feed and then starting at like 1 or 2, whatever, then like she kinda takes over.
Hmm.
And he's pretty good. I mean, he'll sleep for 3, 4 hours in a row. The trouble is right now he won't sleep on his own, like in a bassinet or in a swaddle or anything like that. Gotta be snuggling with somebody.
Yep, that's very typical.
Yeah, the trouble is though, like, there's anxiety about like co-sleeping and like
Yeah,
blankets
yeah.
or something getting over his face or whatever. So it's like we're not sleeping with any blankets on,
Oh,
so we're sleeping just like laying on a bed with a pillow. So make sure that he's safe and it's part of it.
the best system we had for co-sleeping when we were doing it was one of those like boppy pillow things where it's like sort of curved, so it like keeps them in
Hmm.
one place before they
Hmm.
can roll over. And then having that in between the two of us, sort of down a little bit by our legs. So then we're not going to roll over onto him, and he's not going
Hmm.
to get anywhere because the sides of the pillow are keeping him where he is.
Yeah, we had a snuggle me, which is kind of this big sort of O-shaped pillow that's pinched in the sides, right? And so that
Mm-hmm.
way you can kind of put him in on like one of the corners. And that worked for a little bit, but then I think he woke up and realized that he wasn't touching somebody, and like that was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So like we're doing the best we can, and it's going, but it's kind of one
Yeah,
of those things that like I love this, but I'm also excited for the next part.
yeah. I think you can break the co-sleeping a lot easier at 3 months, was what I remember.
Yeah, I think we're about probably a month out from that. We'll be good, I'm sure.
Yeah. One of the things that made it really easy for us was a swing. They got like those like auto rocking things.
Oh yeah, we got one of them. He never
Yeah.
falls. He loves it, but he'll never fall asleep in it. He just kind of like sits and chills and hangs out. It's got like a little semi-mobile kind of thing. It's got black and white little, cushy
Uh-huh.
things on it. So he loves
Yeah.
staring at those. I mean, he's happy as a clam and there, but he just won't fall asleep. I don't know if he's stimulated or whatever by it, but
Well, you'll get there.
And how did you get started playing D&D?
it's a good question. My dad taught my brother and I to play D&D. I must have been 7 or 8, and he was probably 4 or 5. And my uncle came over, and the four of us sat down and we played Keep on the Borderlands, which is this B2
Oh yeah,
AD&D module that is big pink
yeah. That's a
thing.
famous one.
Yeah, man, like we had that, and so it was we were playing AD&D when I was a kid, and so like after that day, I wanted to play all the time, and unfortunately, we just like didn't have time or people, right? And so I DM'd, I like picked up the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I read that thing through and through, over and over and over again, and tried to convince my brother to play as much as he would, and so played that until I was in about 6th or 7th grade, and found out that my sister's history teacher, who was just at the same school, was also like the staff person on the gaming club, who also loved AD&D and second edition. And so then on my lunch hours, I was allowed to leave the cafeteria to go play D&D with my history teacher, which was sick.
Just you?
Yeah, well, no, me and a couple other people, right? So we had like
Okay, yeah.
I think he had like a group of 6 kids or whatever. It's very
Uh-huh.
Stranger Things kind of, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like in those days, whenever you rolled stats, you just rolled them straight all the way down. Like if you, before you chose your class or anything, you just rolled your 6 stats. Like I think it was strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma in that order. And then you got to decide what your class was based on that. There was no modifiers for hit points. So like your wizards would just roll 1d4 plus whatever your con bonus was. And like that was it. And so like you'd have 3 hit points going into uh into level 1.
Yeah, no, I actually like that system for generating stats a lot because it feels like it gives a more organic creation of characters.
It's certainly nostalgic.
Yeah, of course, it means that like if you have a particular idea for a character, you can't necessarily execute it.
Yeah.
If you don't, then it's a way to get the juices flowing for what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I picked that up, and then my buddies and I, who were all kind of part of the club, eventually we got into high school. We played 3.5 for a little while, and then I started playing Magic the Gathering competitively around the country, and then D&D kind of played. Some went to the wayside until
Oh, cool.
I actually moved down to Raleigh again, and then one of my college buddies had a group going, and I picked up 5th edition again, and then the first time DM there just like wasn't really feeling it, and so then that same buddy bought me the Ravnica book for 5e as well as the DMG, and he loaned me his player's handbook or second copy of it, and he's like, why don't you just take a look at these? And then I pulled together some guys at work, and come to find out that my buddies Kevin, Josh, Jake, and Adam all had been dungeon masters before, and so had I. And then we got one other buddy named Austin who had never played but turned out to be one of our best players. And then we ran a 2.5-year Ravnica campaign, which was great.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I play Magic, but I can't say I really follow the lore that much. So I'm not really familiar with the Ravnica setting.
It's just like it's a massive city. Like the whole plane is one big city, and so it's a lot of intrigue and politicking and that kind of stuff going on. And it was very clear to the players that like no matter how powerful you're gonna get, there was always like a bigger, badder thing just like around the corner, right? They've got these massive guild leaders, which are pretty much like walking deities. At all times. I mean, you could just go up and kind of talk to them if they're in the wrong neighborhood, and everything. It was fun. It was a good time. It was a good time. A couple of people who had played Magic the Gathering before, so I definitely used some characters from cards to kind of help add some flavor. But like even the folks who had never played Magic before, I mean, it didn't really matter. They were playing D&D, and that was the fun part.
Yeah, like if you don't care about it, it's still a decent setting.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
So I guess that also answers one of my other questions, which is usually like, how did you get to be a DM?
Yeah. Like I've always found myself I've always found myself having more fun as a DM. I have a degree in musical theater, a bachelor's degree, and so just the ability to play as many characters as you can, be the narrator and setting the scene, narrating combat, all that kind of stuff just sort of naturally came, and I just found myself more engaged, being a DM than a player.
Yeah, it is. You get a lot more control and activity as a DM compared to a player where you have to wait for someone else's turn, whereas a DM, you're always the one that's responding to each of the players. So are you still playing in that Ravnica world, or are you doing something else now?
Yeah, we played for 2.5 years and eventually got to level 16 from one, and then just kind of said that that was it. And one of the things that Ravnica doesn't necessarily offer itself to is a lot of deities, and so we didn't really play with many deities at all. I mean, like, I think we had a one cleric, but their deity was more of just like the idea of hope and life sort of thing, rather than like any particular faced personification. Um,
Yeah, unless you're doing the guild leaders, I think the
yeah,
magic settings are usually pretty limited.
right. There's not too many actual deities that grant power. So what I did is we wanted to play in a setting that used more of, a religious setting where almost everybody kind of followed, a god of sorts. And so I also, through this first campaign, sort of hodgepodge levels together. Like, I very much planned out what I was going to do for level 8, but I did that one with when the characters were level 7. And I sort of just kind of let the story unfold as it was. And eventually it was like pretty good, but there's definitely some levels that I look back and I'm like, yeah, level 13 wasn't my best, right? Or level 8 wasn't that great. But
Hmm.
there's some good moments throughout. So what I did with this
Yeah.
second setting is I kind of sat down and made like a whole sort of through line story. And actually, the very first thing that I kind of wrote down was what happens at the end of the campaign. Like, what is the pinnacle moment that we're all kind of moving towards?
Hmm.
Um, and that's at like level 16. And so then I decided, well, like, what needs to happen right before that in order to make sense? And then what happens right before that? And then what happens right before that? And like, how did the characters get here? And how did the characters get here? And that got me all the way back to like level 9-ish, level 8. So then I said, okay, so all this stuff is going to happen between levels 9 and 16. How can we start foreshadowing that at the beginning? Like, what happens at level 1? So then I went back to level 1 and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there was this gap at like levels 6, 7, and 8, which to this day is still not written. But what I'm going to do is tie in some character backstories. Like, they're going to explore the world based on the character backstories.
No, that's good. That's really good.
And so like levels 1 through 4, which are very much like the early stages of every D&D campaign, foreshadowing, setting the scene, and that well, they just hit level 5 here, and that was them like, we had, I forget what the trope is called, but it's essentially some guy that nobody believes, but he's actually right. Like, he's got the nail on the head, but nobody in the world believes him because he's kind of this crazy senile old man.
Hmm.
And so it's funny because 4 of my players did not believe him, but one of them is latched onto this, like, this conspiracy theorist idea, and it, like,
Hmm.
is 100% certain it is true, and is now looking for all the clues that they've already found or that they will find about, like, how the fact that that's gonna unravel, which is really exciting. So they're gonna travel to one of the druids sort of circle to see how that's helped, and like the whole reason why he's left the druid circle to go on the adventure is going to be the reason why like the world is sort of the way that it is, and um all that's going to come to a head at level 9 when eventually they're going to have to start to kind of go on this godly quest.
I was gonna say that idea for like not knowing like not trusting a sage, comes from Cassandra from Greek mythology.
Ah, yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely. She is yeah, I knew that one. I knew that one too. That's okay. That's good.
So it's interesting. You said like you designed backwards from rank 16 to 9, and then tried to fill the other like 8 levels. And my reaction would have been, okay, let's start at level 9 then, because that's got all the pieces.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is that like once we got to 9, essentially what it is that kind of kicks off the end game of the story, right? Like that. So in theory, it could be level 10 or 11 or 15. It doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
But essentially what it is it starts to kind of utilize each of the gods that I've kind of created in this pantheon as part of the storyline, and they kind of touch on most, if not all of them, in those 7 levels or so. And so there's a moon goddess that's kind of also the goddess of secrets, um,
Mhm.
and the goddess of hope, right? Like this light in the darkness. And so the first kind of 8 or 9 levels are all about how the world is decaying and dying, and there's this sort of plague that's kind of taking over the world. And at level 9, they meet they have a meeting at the top of a mountain at like this secret shrine to this goddess, and she says she like opens this door, or she tells them about a door that they can open if they kind of pass these trials, and kind of like just sends them on their way. And that can happen really anywhere. Like that can happen in the storyline pretty much anywhere. All they have to do is just get to this place. And so there really isn't anything in particular that has to happen right before it, which is where I kind of got stuck, I guess. And so instead of just like kind of ramming my head into the wall until it broke down, started kind of going in from the other end and seeing just like where the characters would naturally come from in order to kind of find that joining piece.
Okay. Yeah. No, I guess another option, if you don't find something that fills like 6 through 8, besides the backstory stuff, like if you run out of something, you can always just do a time skip too. There's another. I've used that occasionally.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think because of our just because of our group that I have, which I think, of course, is one of the biggest things about being a DM, is tailoring your story, your world, and everything to your players. Is I mean, in the past, there's definitely been those games where I show up and I don't have anything planned, and my players kind of take over with like what they want to do, or places that they want to go explore, and almost like a dream, we're kind of like exploring the world and writing the world as they're exploring it, and at the same time, and things are just sort of happening. I can't tell you how many times I've had players be like, "Oh, I wonder if there's this thing behind the door," and I'm like, "That's a great idea. Guess what's behind the door now, right?" And it just kind of works out that way because they have this penchant for wondering aloud, right? And sort of helping write the world themselves. Instead of asking, "Do I see a shop that sells pies?" they say, "I'm going to go over to one of these local shops and search for pies," right? And that just sort of helps make things smoother and easier. So it's quite the blessing having the playing group that I have.
Well, I mean, D&D is basically improv storytelling with
right.
like a mechanism for deciding action. So like all you're doing is asking for suggestions from the audience after a fashion.
Yeah, I suppose, right? It's pretty much the same thing.
What's the name of your campaign world? I forgot to ask that.
So the realm of the gods comes from like the beginning of the end, and of course the center. It's spelled Azbymn, right? Which of course kind of just
That's how you came up with it.
Yeah, right. Azbymn.
Okay, so it's just an alphabet joke.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Azbym is there. And truly, I don't think I ever really sort of named the mortal realm. I don't think anybody really ever asked. So it's
All
kind
right.
of a
So they just the Earth.
yeah,
All
we'll
right.
call it the
That's
Earth,
good.
call it Faerun, whatever. Like it's just sort of this. It's a stereotypical kind of realm. We never really named it. Yeah, it was unimportant at the time, unimportant at the time.
I love that. But it's just Alpha and Omega, but we're going to use the English alphabet for it. All right. So you've got the gods and the plague, which sound interesting. Which one of those do you want to talk about first?
Let's start with the gods because the plague kind of comes after that as well.
Okay.
And so the pantheon that I created is it. I mean, as soon as we start to kind of go through some of these, it pulls from a lot of tropes from a lot of different. It's almost like a mixed bag of mythology, and some reference Greek gods, some reference Nordic gods. I think there's even a couple references to like Egyptian gods. I've referenced the gods of Critical Role, right? Like, because this is just sort of our own kind of personal pantheon. It just kind of goes without saying. Just some tropes are fun, and others kind of just come from you. And so
steal what you want.
Yeah, right. So we did a bit of a pantheon at the front, and then they have these sort of anti-gods, which are like 4 titans. I kind of think of them as like the Greek titans, but instead of tornadoes and volcanoes, they're sort of like the 4 horsemen kind of thing, but a little different. We'll get to those, I guess, towards the end. But what I wanted instead of like a Zeus or a Jupiter or an Odin type figure as a king, I wanted a woman leading. And so I made Menora, who's this sort of mother of gods, goddess of life and birth and dawn and growth and calm and home and hearth and just sort of this general warmth about it. And apparently I wrote her well enough that 2 of my 5 players kind of picked her as their patron god, somebody that they worship. And it's really going to work out perfectly because we get into the storyline in a bit, but she's sort of the main focus of like the whole campaign. Gods in my setting don't die per se, but or they can't.
They don't in most settings.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Like, this is the whole point of the campaign, is the fact that they don't physically die, but they are, in this case, Menora at this time is dying. And she's sick and elderly, but still doing what she needs to in order to sort of survive. But these sort of little decaying pieces of her essence are leaving the realm of the gods, and they are sinking into the world, and they're starting to infect those without calmness and serenity, those with hopelessness, or maybe those who are suffering from depression or these things, and they're starting to get physically ill from some of these mental struggles that they've been having, and then eventually in one night, which is the opening of the setting, day 1, level 1, the characters experience some characters who are beloved elderly members of the town who are sick and are dying, but then instantly feel better. But later on that night, you come to find out that they have this sort of zombie-like appearance where they've lost their mind, but they're rabid and ravaging. And unfortunately, they had to slay their friends, or these people that are kind of beloved amongst the town.
Oh,
They have these green eyes and sort of super strength, and just this sort of decaying essence that's from Menora is sort of infecting these people across the country, and it happens to, every town in earshot, all in the same night.
That's interesting. There's a lot of interesting things there. One of the things that I think this is just coincidence is the Pathfinder 2nd edition tutorial scenario has a very similar plotline.
But does it? I've never played Pathfinder.
Yeah, it's like there's this like ritual that your town does, and you end up having to, through the ritual, like you figure out that like all of your friends and elderly people in the town have been like kidnapped by zombies.
Oh,
or undead, but
sure,
skeletons in this case.
Yeah.
So there's some similarities. It's clearly not the same thing. But,
yeah, for sure.
I thought it was interesting.
And so the very first thing that I kind of wrote to in the campaign is at level 16, one of the characters who's going to be a fighter character in this case, just happened to be the character, is going to need to take a mystical sword that they're going to craft throughout the campaign, and they're going to have to drive it through the heart of Menora, like as she lays in bed sick. And what that does is it sort of releases her dying essence into this sort of new life and starts a whole new sort of realm of prosperity and safety amongst the thing. But it's this idea that a human needs to end up taking this mystical sword, going to the realm of the gods, and like slaying the god, otherwise the world will fall to pieces.
Okay. A god can't do that because gods aren't allowed to do that?
Yeah, I kind of just wrote it like a rule that said that it had to be a human to do it. Fate.
Prophecy, whatever.
Yeah, right? Like just kind of one of the rules of the world, I guess.
So, there's a couple things I wanted to unpack there. One of them is, like, I was talking about this in a previous episode of, like, the pieces of a god spreading out throughout the campaign setting is, like, that's called animism, where, like, everything is like a god.
Mm-hmm.
This is very, like, malevolent. So that's an interesting idea. How'd you come up with that?
It's really interesting. I came up with the piece first. I wanted a human character or a humanoid character to slay a god. but I wanted it in a way that wasn't selfish. I wanted it in a way that was actually going to probably be sad and painful for the character to do so. I wanted this tension for the player to think of like, am I really going to do this? Is this what they want? And I wanted that moment. And we'll see, depending on how like the rest of the campaign plays out, if that crafting is going to end up giving sort of the emotional response that I'm looking for. But this pinnacle moment in the entire campaign obviously has to be pretty powerful. And so like I'm hoping that when we get there, like it is, it kind of, causes players to emotionally respond. And so then I had to think, I mean, like, why would they do that if it wasn't for personal gain, right? Like, why would a character kill a god if it wasn't for personal gain, or if it wasn't out of spite or anger or something like that? And, out of mercy, I guess, or because of need was sort of the next answer. And then it came up the idea, well, why would they need to kill them? Well, because the rule is that like gods can't kill them, a human needs to do so because of some prophecy or something. But then like why would they just kill them out of the blue? That doesn't make sense. They have to be sick or dying or something like that. And so then once I got to that nugget, the god is sick and dying. What sort of effect does a sick and dying god or goddess have on the world? Well, this is the goddess of life and birth and dawn and growth and serenity and calm. And in theory, I mean, the myths are that she is the actual sun. You look up in the sky, you see the sun, you're looking at Menora. And so I thought about doing like some sort of darkness, but then I thought that was a little heavy-handed. And I figured that like as soon as the whole world is plunged into darkness, maybe that means, that the campaign fails. Maybe that's the fail case. So I needed something more subtle, right? I needed something that was something that, I mean, level 1 characters can see an effect, but also is something that is big enough to investigate for 6, 7, 8 levels before they actually figure out the jump start into like the end quest line.
Right.
And so then just like the idea that maybe the sickness isn't maintained or contained inside of her, like deity body, and that it sort of starts to leak out into the world. What have this is like the decaying portion of it, and so therefore it's got to have some malicious effect on the world, I guess. And
give us a more immediate threat too.
Yeah, for sure. It says that this is happening now, right? And it's not some prophecy that you have to do eventually. It's like this is an issue that we have, and so we need to solve this. And so my characters have been pretty focused on the green-eyed menace, so they called it, as it's a big thing. So campaigns, I think they've gone, I think about 2.5 weeks or so in the campaign to get up to level 5. Probably 3 weeks now. And they've got more questions than answers.
It's pretty fast.
Which is part of, early campaigns.
Yeah.
But there's certainly the urgency is there, which is good.
So I have one more question, like the name Menora. So did you pick that to like reference the like Hanukkah, or is it some sort of?
It actually more so came from the it was just a quick reference to she's a god in the Critical Role campaign. The that Caduceus Clay goes to the Wild Mother. No, it's I don't know. She's a similar sort of goddess of the Wild Mother. There we go, the Wild Mother, Melora. And so obviously we couldn't use the exact same god, but it was similar enough, and so it just kind of. Yeah, it sounded good. It sounded like a good name. I guess I don't really know.
Okay. All right. I was thinking it was like Menora or Minerva, not Melora, but okay. Yeah, I still see the similarity.
Yeah. It's okay. Minora, which is a little bit farther away from like a Hanukkah menorah. I guess it kind of works, right? I don't really know all the symbology behind a Hanukkah one, but
yeah, I was just like, is there any like 9 candles or something like that that's gonna, or 8?
No, I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't use anything like that, mainly just because I'm not really up on all of the symbolism. And even though I don't think anybody in our group is Jewish, I just don't want to. I don't want to misrepresent in a way that could be construed as negative,
Okay, that's interesting because another thing I noticed was that the guilty slaying of a god also sounds like they're sort of playing off of Christian guilt almost.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's this idea that it comes from the idea that slaying a god is a big deal, and there are really only a couple I can think of a couple of reasons why you would want to do so. And I
Mhm.
didn't want to force upon my characters any sort of um, ambition or uh, glory or something along those lines, mainly just because of the kind of players that we have.
Mhm.
And so it's really interesting in our Ravnica campaign. We used the card Massacre Girl, the magic card Massacre Girl, and I created Massacre Girl to be this like CR 15, essentially demon infested teenager who kind of goes on these rampages and doesn't really understand what she's doing, but kind of just gives herself over to this sort of like inner demon. And they had to stop her, but come to find out, one of the only ways that they could stop her is by killing her. But in doing so, the person who struck the final blow then became infected by the demon itself. Or what do demons do? They don't infect people. They
Possess.
thank you possess the demon. And so, but there was a big conflict within the group, and this same character who I think is going to get set up to slay the god was the one who ended up going in to like her room, and instead of like talking to her as Massacre Girl, they just talked to her as the teenage girl that she was, and because she felt safe, like the demon sort of subsided, or she grew enough power to kind of like just speak as a human. And eventually, she like begged him to take her life, and because she didn't want to be like this anymore. And then it was this really, I mean, really powerful moment to kind of be a part of, and everybody else was just kind of watching as it was just me and this one player. And eventually, he like had her look out the window and started narrating a sunrise to her as it was coming up, and then like you know took a mystical dagger he had and like plunged in the back of her neck, and it was like really powerful stuff. And so we're kind of
It treated her like Lenny from
a
Mice and
little
Men.
bit, yeah, but like she was totally aware of it, right? Instead of like just not knowing, like she asked kind of for that
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
but it was a really powerful moment, and it really sort of dawned on me like why we play D&D was that session. It's this idea that not every session, not every game has to be this big, wild, super cool game. You might not even have fun every game. But what you do is D&D is cultivating a situation where these really powerful emotions and storylines can come through. Um, and sometimes you just find a gold nugget. Like it's like panning for gold, and sometimes you turn up empty, but sometimes you strike gold and like you hit the jackpot. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm trying to kind of cultivate that a little bit. So towards the end of the campaign, there's a golden nugget at the end that I'm hoping is there. But so instead of like trying to stumble upon them, I'm trying to almost like really plant the seeds early and cultivate to that point. But I suppose you're right. We're kind of calling into some Christianity aspects to it. I guess I hadn't really considered it, but we are.
Well, I mean, it's different because I forget his name. Longitis isn't Christian, but he still understands that he's doing something wrong within the typical
Yeah.
mythology. It's not quite the same thing, but there was some similarities enough that I thought that might have been a partial inspiration.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe it probably was, honestly. I was raised Christian. I don't really currently consider myself Christian, but I'm very familiarized with the mythology, and so it wouldn't surprise me if that idea had come from somewhere, within that.
All right, well, that's gods in the plot of your campaign.
That's like one of 15 gods. We're gonna be here forever.
Yeah. We'll.
Here, let me bring up one more sort of set of gods. There's a pair of gods that
Oh
I'm
yeah.
really excited about, and this one of the things that I did with a lot of these gods is the dwarves have their own god. There's a god of the forge, and then they're like the sort of Yanti have a god. There's a snake god, that kind of thing, which is exciting. But
Mhm.
one that I'm really excited about was this idea that there are two gods. One is the goddess of death, whereas the other is the goddess of the underworld. One I named Sylph, Sylf, is the goddess of death, which is this idea of the traveler, the Grim Reaper type. She doesn't look that way, but just is the person who shows up as you're dying and then helps get you to the underworld. And the other one is Nym, Nym, and she's the goddess of the underworld who overlooks and oversees pretty Hades type, like is the person who kind of like lords over the underworld and keeps everybody safe there. And the lore is that these two goddesses were actually one goddess, Silfnim, who traveled the world collecting lost souls to kind of keep them and travel with them. But as humanity and just humanoids expanded and grew, the job became too much for one individual. And so the lore is that she took her own scythe and split herself in two, creating both Sylph and Nym. But in doing so, it sort of tore the realities from the main plane of existence in the underworld. And so because of that, there is danger if they ever were to meet. But because they're also the same sort of person, in two bodies, there's this sort of longing and actual marriage between the two of them. And so there's this longing for Sylph to bring gifts and sort of usher these souls to Nym. And then, of course, there's always this longing from Nym to be on the other side and to be rejoined with her wife and self. And just in general, I had one of my players sort of latch onto these two. He's officially a follower of Sylph in the game and is a warlock who is, I think he's an undead warlock that is kind of somebody who just wanders the world and is there for people's last rites, just always in the right place at the right time to give people last rites. And so sometimes in combat, he's the person who takes them from, perfectly healthy to last rites. But also sometimes he is more of a benevolent, shows up to grant peace to people in their dying moments. And honestly, I feel like there's so many different kind of inspirations for this sort of thing. I mean, you've seen all the time where people are talking about how life is giving gifts to death and it just takes 80 years to get there. I don't really know exactly if there's a particular, theology that likes that. And you've also heard of different gods that split themselves in two. And again, I don't know if there's any one particular place where I pulled it from, but it just really sort of, it's one of those things where I had this idea and it sort of formed itself as I was like writing it out, which is really nice.
It's cool. I like it.
Oh, and then of course there's also, as I kind of scroll down here towards the bottom, these 4 titans, which I think are going to be showing up a lot more here in these levels 6, 7, and 8 as sort of the sort of like the villains, I guess, of the campaign and the followers of these titans. They're called the Bottomless, the Hooded One, the Flagellant, and the Temptress, and they essentially represent the ideas of hunger, death, pain, and lust, sort of respectively. And so, instead of like these tornadoes and volcanoes, it's more of the things that really frighten or affect humanoids in a typically really difficult setting. These are things that a lot of people struggle with, and I think that they're seeing this moment in history as the gods and Menora particularly are weak. They're at a weakened state, and so if they can kind of steer the acts of humans and humanoids in general, then there's a possibility of taking out a god altogether and not having her come back.
That sounds similar. So that's in 4th edition, they had gods, and there was this other force of like, I think they were called primals.
Yeah.
It sounds similar to that for like what the Titans are in your campaign, where there's this sort of not quite divine, but on that level force that's malevolent and almost against creation itself.
Yeah, I took some inspirations from obviously the Greek Titans in a way, right? They were kind of locked in this otherworldly bubble, and then I also took some Critical Role. They have their calamity, and I don't know exactly what he calls them, but betrayer gods, I think is what they're called. And again, they're not like this exactly, but they're very much in a similar sort of sense. So there's scary anti-gods, right? Not gods, not demons, just sort of this other sort of entity out in the world that are extremely powerful and you know,
Yeah, primordials. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what they're
yep,
called.
yep. Things that are never going away. You can't kill these things, but they definitely are scary beyond belief.
I mean, I forgot one of the initial questions I usually ask is for like a physical description of your world. So what's it like physically for the area that the players are exploring and
Yeah, so
adventuring around in?
it's interesting. We'll tie back to one of the gods here in a second, but it's a vast world that they're pretty much in kind of the southern part. It takes a lot of inspiration from just Faerun because that's what you have a lot of maps for and things like that. But
Mhm.
we've got a large ocean to the west, and then
Yep.
so a number of different rolling hills and forests along the way. A huge sort of glacial area in the north as well, and then the entire eastern half of the map. So in Faerun, they've got this big desert called Anarok, right? That is sort of in the center, and then there's some extra area to the right of that, east of that. Um,
Mhm.
my Anarok kind of just continues on without end, and the whole lore behind that was that one of the gods, which is the god of the harvest, um, was walking around on the earth in a massive sort of um, form, and because the harvest wasn't very good that year, humanoids and other creatures sort of rose up and slayed him on Earth, just his physical body. He's still alive and around up in Azbym, which is the realm of the gods, but no god comes down to the world anymore. And his physical body is buried deep underneath that desert, and nothing will grow there, until the end of time, sort of thing. So says the lore.
Okay.
So it's a very, I guess, pretty standard kind of world that has a bunch of different biomes and different areas to allow for all kinds of different, um, monsters and peoples and gods of different kinds. There's a big floating city, which is typically it's populated by dragon, dragonborn, and draconoids, those kinds of things, because it's a floating city is kind of also um, it's the shrine towards Draenor, which is the dragon god, and he's an emerald dragon god. So he's kind of like the god of the sky. Oh, I think there's anything else.
Emerald seems like a strange choice for a gem for a lead dragon and a dragon of the sky to me.
Yeah, it's just kind of one of those things that I thought sort of made him a little bit different. One of the things a lot you'll notice kind of if we were to go through each of these gods is they're pretty standard for tropes, with one sort of like twist, like something that makes them a little bit different. Um, Kind of make them my own, I guess. And there's no
Okay.
particular reason why it had to be emerald. It could have been really anything. I think really what it kind of came down to was that the um, Fizbans had just come out recently when I was creating this, and the Gem Dragonborn were recent, in my mind, and particularly kind of
Mhm.
latched onto the Emerald Dragons. It's just something I thought was fun.
Okay. Yeah. No, I haven't read that yet, but I do remember the gem dragons from third edition, so
Ah, yeah, yeah.
they were neat then. I actually used one of them in my first adventure.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so it's just sort of like your typical kind of. You said it's based off of Faerun, so it's got a lot of Western, um, European themes to it.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty traditional when it kind of comes to D&D settings. Um, I find myself, as somebody who's got like a small background in accents and voice acting and that kind of stuff. It really helps to kind of standardize a lot of that stuff. So I find a lot of my elves are Irish and all of my dwarves are Scottish and or similar sort of lilts. Dragonborns in my campaign happen to have some Eastern European Russian accent, and um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it just kind of. Oh, I steal over the Furbolg idea from Critical Role. I quite like the bovine aspect to them, in particular. I come from Wisconsin, right? So I can do that kind of Canadian up north
Oh
accent
yeah.
pretty well, and so
Okay.
so
Yeah.
that finds themselves over. And there's some of my favorites. I use them pretty sparingly. Particularly right now, there's an apothecary named Phoebes, who's I mean very similar to kind of a Pumat Soul type. That I just love. He's the best.
Okay. Cool. For the map, are you actually just using the Faerun map, or are you just sort of something that's like Anarok and the
I
Western Coast?
pulled a Sword Coast map, and then they use that as like a world map with all of the names pulled off of it.
Hmm.
And I use Foundry VTT as a virtual tabletop because we play virtually. And what I did is I renamed almost every single like city and hills and all that kind of stuff on there. And I hide them on the map so that way only I can see them as a dungeon master. And as they continue to explore the
Ah,
world, I toggle them on so the map kind of continues to fill itself in as they learn about different places. Um, but I mean, the physical map itself is still it's a Faerun map. I think it comes from uh Port of the Dragon Queen or something like that.
oh yeah, it doesn't matter where from. There's so
It's
many
all the same
sources at this
thing,
point.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess it depends on the edition, because the fourth edition messed up the geography a lot.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't matter.
No, I find myself with a lot of fifth edition sort of resources. Uh, I don't. We haven't really touched on it yet, but I've actually since COVID started, I've been playing D&D semi-professionally. I've been leading campaigns of all different kinds. This is the one we're talking about today is my personal campaign with my friends, but there was a point in time in early 2021 where I was leading 8 different campaigns a week. Um,
Oof,
and most of my players were paying to be there. And so
that's that's busy. So that's like one every night plus
ooh,
like three on Saturday or
I was
something.
running I didn't have any on Tuesdays for whatever reason. That wasn't the day, but Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Sunday. And then I had a 40-hour weekday job as well.
Oh God.
Yeah, we've scaled that back quite a bit. That was about as high as it got,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I was guessing that having the kid would make
yeah,
it
the
that you can't
newborn
do that as
we're
much
actually
anymore.
we're down to 0 games right now. Even my personal games on a hiatus right now with the newborn, but I think as we kind of turn the new year in 2023 and get him kind of at 3-4 months, we might be able to find some time to start getting these things back in play.
Yeah, I think I took about a 2 month break when I had my first kid, but with the second, I was more into like I knew what to do and what I could handle,
Yeah,
so
I
I didn't
think
want
it kind of happened to work out that our 2 months ends like right now, and now we're moving into the holidays where I normally would take a little bit of a break anyway. Like all the
Yeah, that's
Christian
true.
holidays that are coming up here soon anyway. So it's we'll just kind of take that extra month and take it easy, ease back into it.
So what about the races for your campaign?
Races for our campaign. Um,
Yeah, so it sounded like you had like racial deities with the dragonborn one and the dwarven one.
yeah, the standards really come through with we've got a drow god and an elf god. We've also got dragonborn. There's a snake-headed god, which is kind of like an ode to Egyptian lore, but also helps with the Yanti, right? They haven't really played any roles in the campaign quite yet. I'm actually pretty open to race. It's one of the things that as I was running a lot of public games, people wanted to come in and they wanted to play like, a tabaxi, and there really weren't any other tabaxi in the world, but or they wanted to play something from the Feywild, and there really wasn't anything else there. But like, as people who are coming in and paying money to play, I'm not going to tell them no, you can't play this kind of character. And so in those campaigns, I suspended a lot of disbelief when it comes to like race for player
Wow.
characters. And so in this one, I sort of kind of took everything that I had done in other games and just sort of allowed it to be. And because the world is so big, there's just different areas where all these different sorts of races can abide. None of my players really took anything wild. We've got a drow that's our undead warlock. We've got 2 humans. I think the most wild thing we have is a furbolg. It's a furbolg druid, but I mean that's not really
Hmm.
super out of the ordinary. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think the craziest thing that they've sort of impacted was a whole town run by gnomes and dwarves, and of course there's an ancient feud on this small mining town of gnomes and dwarves, and they both think that the other is completely like cheats them out of everything, and there's this ages old feud between the two. But I'm kind of free game when it comes to races, like anything that shows up in any of the books, let's do it. I mean, I don't really have any Leonins or Tortles specifically lined up, but it's not that they couldn't happen.
Okay, so does that mean that there aren't really any like the typical D&D fantasy is that like okay, you get a group of adventurers together and then you go and kill some orcs because they all serve Mordor or
Yeah,
whatever.
right.
The orcs are usually evil. So is that something that's not the truth in your
Oh,
campaign
certainly
then?
not. No. Individuals are in the first another sort of homage to Critical Role. In the first couple of levels, they went and fought a bunch of gnolls in a cave because the gnolls had also been infected by sort of these decaying portions. They had all sort of been infected by these sort of decaying portions of Menora that had been moved out of the realm of the gods. And so then they had to like go through the cave and kill some gnolls and that kind of stuff. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that all gnolls are bad, right? But I think that each player kind of comes in with these biases or biases that goblins are bad or orcs are bad or whatever. And I really try to challenge most players, particularly in my public games. I really try to challenge that idea that all goblins are cannon fodder evil characters, particularly if they are a playable race. I don't go nearly as hard for the non-playable races, but like if they're a playable race in 5e, in my opinion, it's all about the individual rather than the sort of racial when it comes to what is good or who is bad kind of thing. I really want to
Okay,
challenge that idea.
all right. Yeah, that's getting to be more common. That I've seen.
Maybe it's my time with Magic the Gathering, right? Because as we played on Ravnica for 2.5 years, and one of the main races is goblins, right? Like goblins
Oh, that's a good
very
point.
much
Yeah.
in like World of Warcraft type. Like, yeah, they're certainly eccentric and probably chaotic, but that certainly doesn't make them evil or bad. They're just selfish typically, or they like to push the button. They don't have high impulse control. They usually find themselves on the wrong side of the law, but that doesn't mean that they all are, right? That doesn't mean they're bad or evil or malicious. That just means that they usually find themselves disenfranchised, and a lot of the times when those people find themselves disenfranchised, they find themselves stealing or doing what they have to survive or finding their paycheck, getting their food on their table by whatever means. But, also in Ravnica, they're quite important to the Is It League, which is the League of Inventors, right? Because they come up with these wild and crazy ideas and they don't stop to
Mhm.
ask, should we? They just do it because it would be fun, interesting, or you can learn something new, right? This impulse control isn't there. And that sort of fervent inventorship and research, I think I really, really admire about goblins in particular. And so almost all of my goblins in all my campaigns have that similar sort of quality.
Okay. Yeah. So would you say that like there? I guess this is a way of explaining it. Is like the typical D&D fantasy has black and white racism, and I guess your campaign still has racism with like goblins having like a place that and stereotypes, but they're not like all evil XP treasure bags.
Yeah, that's a good point. I really kind of struggle with the idea that it's still racism, because that's kind of one of the things I really try to break the mold on. But it certainly has this idea of stereotypical, right? And like a lot of goblins find themselves in similar categories. Um,
Well, I mean, part of it is that I mean, racism in the real world there isn't nearly enough genetic differences to justify it, but in D&D you have like there are actual mechanical
sure,
differences
yeah,
between
you've
the
got the idea of
races.
Goliaths being 8 feet tall and goblins being 2 or 3. Like
Right.
that significantly impacts just like what they can do and I suppose where they find themselves. Yeah.
Okay, a similar vein, like having a society that doesn't have sexism isn't really possible because there are functional differences between the sexes. It's more about just having one that's equal in how they're
Yeah.
treated and what they can
Yeah,
achieve.
yeah. I think it's just the idea that to each finding their own place and celebrating those places and celebrating the positives and what they're good at rather than trying to drive differences in the idea that like one is better than the other.
Okay, gotcha. So I guess my next question is this is something I think might feature a lot in a cartoon show is because you want to have like some faceless evil villain. Do you use a lot of undead as your villains?
No, not traditionally. I did in this case just
Oh,
because
okay.
like they're very easy stat blocks to throw against level 1 characters without making sure that your character will die, right? Like, I don't want to kill my players at
Yeah, that's
level
true.
1, and so like a zombie is a pretty easy thing to do. Um, I find myself, if I ever need a sort of a faceless undead creature, particularly at higher levels, is there are these characters, I think they're called like the Lost or the Wandering or something like that. And they are nightmare fuel in the monster manual. And they're very powerful things too. They're sort of these aberration, um, and they all have this sort of, they all seem to be like humanoid sort of appearances, but then they also come from this idea that each one is, hungry or slothful or angry or whatever, vengeant kind of thing.
Yeah, I want to talk a little about like the professional DMing you were saying you were doing. Were you still using this campaign setting for that, or was it were you doing individual things for them? How was that
So
working?
when I first started, I was doing this idea where I was running a Ravnica campaign. I wanted to make myself different, right, than all of the other professionals on the website that I was using.
Uh-huh.
And so I was doing a Ravnica campaign and kind of just being a Ravnica specialist. And then I found like after running two, three, four campaigns on Ravnica, it just like I wanted to do other things. Although the world is wonderful, it doesn't really allow for that long distance traveling time.
I was gonna say it sounds like you were trying to get to 10 so you could have one for each of the
Yeah,
guilds.
right. And so like we got to the point where I wanted to do a like a larger traveling campaign. I wanted to do
Right.
um something where like if you go to a town and like the group sort of like mucks up the town and then they leave, like it's just as is tradition in D&D, it didn't kind of screw over everything else. And like in Ravnica, when you do that, like everything is so interconnected that it there's ramifications everywhere. Whereas in
Mhm.
like your traditional sort of setting, so long as you never go back to that town and like word doesn't spread too far, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I can see how that's a bit more of audience gratification if there's fewer negative
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah, yeah. And so like I certainly are negative consequences, right? Like some of my campaigns have been like we've done all kinds of jail heists to get people out of jail because of that kind of thing. Where I've even had a player
Oh
retire a
man.
character because they got sentenced to 2 years in prison and they just picked up a different
Okay.
character because they wanted to. But in general, there's less of that in a standard sort of campaign. And then of course I've also like had some people say that they wanted to just run the books. Like I've run Curse of Strahd twice, Storm King's Thunder twice, Heart of the Dragon Queen 3 times. I've run Wild Beyond the Witchlight when that came out, all in a public professional setting. And so like as you just continue to garner these extra resources and play in sort of these other sort of campaigns, it just sort of solidifies the general Faerunish world as you sort of explore all these different campaign settings, which is neat.
Cool.
And so eventually, what I found myself doing is I got to some of those like really big weeks. Um, I stopped doing homebrew campaigns. I shouldn't say that. I offered them, but I offered them at a significantly higher pricing point because
Ah,
it
okay.
just took more time, right? And so I found that I was able to be successful just running books and the modules that D&D Beyond or D&D was putting out, mainly because they were also coming out fast. I mean, like D&D over the last couple of years has really put out a lot of 5e content. And so it was really easy to
Yeah.
get people to say, "Oh, you want to try the new book? Like, let's do that." And it takes 10 to 12 months for that one group to do that for a 12 level campaign or whatever. And so then by that time, a new book came out. I had one
Yeah.
I had one couple, they weren't, they didn't know each other when they started, but they both signed up for my very first starter campaign that I had done specifically aimed at people who had never played before. And they played through Lost Mines of Phandelver. And then after level 4, they wanted to keep going, and so they jumped into Curse of Strahd, right? And 4 of the 5 people who started with Lost Mines moved on to Curse of Strahd, and then eventually we went all the way through the end of Curse of Strahd, and then they finished that. And then 2 people started a second campaign where they played Storm King's Thunder after that as well. And so like they've been playing with me for 2.5 years now, 3 campaigns, like 4 characters, each of them, whatever. It's been crazy.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, and they're both great players now. I'm really proud of them both because I remember they both kind of came in saying, "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what the stuff is." The one guy wanted to be, he wanted to be Legolas exactly, and I'm like, "Well, we can be a ranger and that kind of stuff, and this is what it looks like." And eventually, we kind of moved
Yeah.
away from that, and he always finds himself going back to some sort of archer type character. Bless his heart, but he's a good. They're both great role players now as well. They really have found something that they enjoy. I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I just remember them starting off not knowing anything about D&D. It's really nice.
That's pretty cool. And I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with having a particular character type that you like playing and want
Yeah, unless they're rogues or monks. Get those people out of here.
to. So you've always just done 5th edition for the professional stuff?
On the pro scene, yeah, and I've offered other things, and I've had a couple of individual people who have sort of been like, "Hey, I want to do a one shot of this or that." The thing about it is all of the digital, so all of the professional things find themselves on digital platforms because it's so much easier to take a person from Texas, a person from. I've had a couple people from the UK. I've had some people from. I had one person stationed in Japan. He's a U.S. citizen
Wow.
stationed in Japan with the military.
Oh yeah.
And so like when you get all these people from around the world, most people just want to play the more recent things. And also I found that there's 2 kinds of people who want to typically play with a professional DM. And one of them is people who've never played before. They don't know what they're doing. They want some guidance. They want this sort of professional experience rather than trying to figure out with their friends. Or the other group is somebody who has played for years. They've played for 20 years or they know all the rules of 5th edition and they want to really sort of stretch the boundaries of their character creation, of their play style. They really want to, maybe they've never played one of the books. They've always wanted to play Storm King's Thunder and they haven't had a group to play that, or they've always wanted to play Curse of Strahd. They've never found a group to play it and want to come like play through that sort of thing. And in both situations, most of those people, they want to learn or they want to play with what is familiar to them. And honestly, I think as far as onboarding is concerned, 5th edition is about as easy as it gets to kind of sit down, roll some dice, and just like play the game.
Yeah, I can see just it being popular being a reason to have more of that when you're doing a paid service.
Yeah. So I certainly would welcome going all the way back to AD&D, the THACO times, and all that kind of stuff. But it just, I guess it's more so as a nostalgic kind of factor to me rather than I think it being any sort of superior game system.
Yeah, I for one would not like to go back to THACO.
I mean, here's the thing: I would if you paid me. I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't choose to do it, but like at the end of the day, if you're offering a paid service, you do what the kind of customer wants, right? So long as it's within
Yeah,
reason, and that to me is within reason enough.
yeah. I guess if you know the system, it's been long enough that I don't.
Oh, I'd have to brush up. It's been, I read that book enough times. I'm sure it's rolling around in my brain somewhere, but I probably couldn't answer too much about it now.
Yeah, I started playing right when they transitioned to 3rd edition, so I did a few sessions in 2nd and then picked up 3rd. Don't think I ever read the 2nd edition book. Man, I think we hit through all the usual points that I want to get to in an interview. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't had a chance to get to yet?
Oh man. No, that's about it. I mean, I find just that I'm in obviously the podcast Discord under the name Draconis. If anybody wants to ask questions about my campaign setting, professional DMing, just in general my history, I'm always here. Happy to talk.
Cool. Yeah. And if anyone's got, do you have any advice that you want to give any other DMs?
Sure. First off, obviously, the number one piece of advice I can only give to every DM ever is just have fun, right? Obviously, this is a game, and obviously, there's lots of work and there's a lot of parts that we put into this sort of game to make the campaign settings that we do. But like, remember, at the end of the day, it's about having fun. either with your friends or with strangers and making friends and that kind of thing. But um, there's a pretty severe balance that you have to hit with sort of adapting to your players and making sure that you adapt your setting and your world to your players, while also making sure that you're sort of true to yourself and you do the same things that you want to do. Because if you continuously sort of find yourself giving in and doing what your players want you to do at all times, you may find yourself losing your way. So having a plan, sort of sticking to it, and being flexible within that plan makes everything that much easier.
Yeah, I'd say that's some good advice. That's definitely something that's in the DMG as well, with like trying to it's saying like start small.
Oh yeah,
That same idea.
for sure.
And like you can expand the sandbox that your players get to play in as you go through the campaign, so that like the events are getting grander, and then your ability to juggle different pathways and different things gets bigger as you get more experience. Yeah, that's good advice. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Bob, or Draconis on the Discord. This is good talking with you.
Of course, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, man.